Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We do have an official announcement that I want to make.
Classic Gaming Headquarters is officially shoveled out.
No, that's no. Anyway, no, I have an official announcement that I have to make.
Yes.
And that was, apparently, we had ads.
Oh, yeah.
They invaded our episodes, probably for the last couple of years. I thought I turned them off at one point in time, and I think we even announced that I turned them off, and either they got turned on, or I never did a good job at turning them off. I'm going to believe the former, but it was probably the latter. Anyway, to all of our listeners, and especially our patron, the ads should be off now. It's almost like this Patreon patron unlocked with their donation ad-free listening for everybody.
Wow.
Or it gets turned on again. But Zach and I, we made a significant amount of money during the ads. So fortunately, this Patreon is covering the cost. In fact, this one patron that we have, not that we may have multiple patrons, but this one particular patron, in fact, 10x'd the donation, 10x'd the ad revenue that we received. 8x after Patreon takes its cut. But yes, so thanks to the Patreon patroning us, we can now afford to run this ad free.
That's right.
Yes, and also to Zachary's point, the topical thing to talk about would be the weather.
I want people to be able to listen to this episode in the middle of summer and have us talk about snow, and for them to feel like, wow, this is not relevant anymore.
That's true. But it was the blizzard of 2026, and it was certainly a lot of blizzarding.
Yes, it was a lot of snow.
Yeah. If I listened to our episodes ever, then I could listen back to this episode and be reminded about all the snow, but I don't do any of that.
I'm sure the area we live in will soon remind us of all the snow.
And then it'll be like 60.
Yes, yeah.
But also, it's that because we're moving into PAX season, because as we get closer to March, we'll be closer to PAX. Because we're moving into PAX season, since it's early this year, where it was very late last year, it was like uncharacteristically late, and now it is characteristically early. But it's early to the point where it's very possible it might snow in PAX.
Yeah.
Which it has done in the past. Anyway, so Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Recently, I actually just beat a game, so cue the Zach Beats a Game song again. I was playing Reanimal last time we talked, and I continued to play Reanimal with Sean and beat it. And it's a very good game. Again, Reanimal was made by Tarsier Studios. It's kind of a spiritual successor to Little Nightmares. It's a co-op horror puzzle platformer game where you and another player have to explore this creepy world of weird flesh monsters and giant animals. But yeah, really liked it. Thought it was great atmosphere. Thought it was a good game. And pretty short. I think it only took us 4 or 5-ish hours. I think we did like 2 hours one session and then maybe 2.5 another session. So not a super long game, but still very good. But that's not the game I've been recently playing that I'm going to talk about. The game I've recently been playing is Misery. So Misery is a game that was developed by Platypus Entertainment, released in 2025. It is a survival game set in a nuclear apocalyptic world in a Soviet bloc country, and your goal is to survive. By set in a Soviet bloc country, I mean everyone that you encounter, because you do encounter people, they all are wearing like Russian-style hats. And there's a lot of Soviet imagery all over the place. Like you can find Urshankas, which are that classic Russian-style wool hat with the Soviet symbol on it. You can find like Soviet uniforms and stuff that you can wear or sell. But yeah, it's set in an alternate universe where the Cold War escalated to a hot war and nuclear war started. And you're in this Soviet bloc area that is affected by the nuclear fallout. In the game, you start out by building a base. It's in a bunker, and from that base you can actually expand. You can break down the walls in the bunker. You can build out the bunker so it's a little bigger. You have an outdoor area where you're able to garden, and there is a tunnel that you can access that has a door. And when you go to that door, you have two options. One is to go to a location where there are NPCs that you can trade with. These NPCs are always there. It's usually like 4 or 5 NPCs that sell food, that buy junk, that sell ammunition, medical supplies, stuff like that. But the other option is to go to what's called the expedition. And the expedition is like the wilderness. It's a different area full of all sorts of creatures and enemies that you have to deal with. What's cool about the game is that every 20 or 30 minutes or so, there is an emission from the nuclear event. Basically, you start hearing the sirens go off and you have to get inside your bunker. If you don't go in the bunker, everything turns white and your character dies. During this emission, once it's over, the expedition changes. So the area you explore in the expedition will be randomized pretty much every 20 to 30 minutes, meaning that when you do your expedition, you really have to plan ahead because you need to make sure you can make it back to your bunker before the emission happens. But it's pretty cool. It allows you to explore new areas pretty frequently and also makes you subject to new threats. Beyond the different bandits you can encounter, there are also temporal and kind of physics anomalies such as black holes, gravitational fluxes where things are floating, and these weird pulsating explosive spiky black stars that occasionally show up. There's occasional airplane raids, so sometimes you'll be out and you'll hear a plane ahead and it will drop bombs in the area. There's a mysterious cult that goes around with guns and shoots you. They dress like plague doctors. There's also various creatures and monsters that have been affected by the radiation, such as just animals that have been mutated to disturbing creatures that I've yet to encounter, but I think one of them is literally Baba Yaga, which is the house that has chicken feet. So correct. You can encounter Baba Yaga. All the while in this game, you have to maintain your hunger, maintain your thirst, maintain your sanity, and you could do things like drink vodka, play guitar, smoke cigarettes, or poop. In fact, it's not a thing you have to do. It's a thing that just happens, is your character will sometimes poop. Poop ends up on the floor, and you can use it for plants because it's fertilizer.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Also a little gross.
It's a little gross. I found out you can eat it by accident.
Oh, that's even more gross.
It's a fun game. It's a little goofy, but it's also tense. I think that the expedition provides for a lot of tense moments when you're trying to get back to the bunker as the air raid sirens are going off and you have no idea when the emission's going to actually start happening. But it does offer some fun variety against the usual kind of survival vibe. I feel it plays a little differently than games like Vane or like The Forest, both games I really like that are similar survival games. Whereas with this game, because of the expedition system, you have a different type of play loop. So instead of going out to familiar areas or trying to explore new areas in the same static location, the place you explore changes all the time. And that adds a lot of variety. You know, sometimes it's a town that has a forest nearby that has campsites to explore. Sometimes it's a military base that has like a large radar dish. Sometimes it's Baba Yaga. It's just a very interesting game that has some fun variety to it and a little goofy. You know, I think it's intentionally a little kind of friend slop style at times, but still I think a good game nonetheless. That's Misery by Platypus Entertainment.
Great.
It is. So Seth, what about you? What have you been recently playing?
Recently it's been Next Fest, which is going on till March 2nd, and I've been playing some demos as I usually do through Next Fest. This year I've played a few that I've been enjoying that I've actually wishlisted them in case I don't ever talk about them again. Some of the games that I've downloaded and played that I've enjoyed have been Zero Parades, which is the game that is being developed by the people who did Disco Elysium, except instead of playing cop, I think in Disco Elysium is what you play, detective.
Yeah.
Detective. It's arguably the character Disco Elysium's a little vague, but yes, instead of playing a detective, you play a spy. Ooh. In Zero Parades. And in Zero Parades, you retain your memory from what you've been playing, but you still have that weird Disco Elysium type emotions constantly talking to you. So that was I played the demo of that. I played the demo of Cinema Theater Tycoon, which is a cool prison architecture game, except instead of a prison, you're building a theater. And you build a theater from like the dawn of theaters until like more modern age. So you start in like 1901 where you have a silent theater. So you have to have like an entertainer and all that stuff during the intermissions of the shows. And then I also played Terranoth Heroes of Descent, which is like a third-person action game where you kind of reminded me of like an Owlcat game, like Rogue Trader, all that jazz, where you have some characters and it goes into turn-based combat where you have to like deploy your troops and then you have to move them around. The troops, you have 4 characters. There's like a fighter and a wizard and a thief and a archer, and you just deploy them around and go through the quest. I liked the combat. It was a lot of fun. The story didn't hook me, but maybe it would on release. There is an Esoteric Ebb, which is a game that I've been playing, which is Disco Elysium, but with Dungeons and Dragons. And it's an interesting take where you play as a cleric, and depending on your stats, you have the traditional strength, con, dex, intelligence, wisdom, charisma as your stats. Depending on which ones you're maxed on, they talk to you, the stats talk to you. So it's kind of an interesting take on a D&D light. Well, it's SRD, but it's an interesting take on the material. There was Doctrine Cult, which is a game where you start a cult, and it's kind of like Plague Inc., where like you have to be like a virus and spread yourself.
Yep.
It's like that, except you're a cult.
Nice.
And the quest is to get to like 15 million worshippers. It was fine. I played through the entirety of the demo. I feel like it wasn't really intuitive in regards to what the decisions were, and also kind of felt like they used AI to generate a lot of the text, and so like it was fine. I don't know if I would pick it up though. And then I have a couple of games that I downloaded that I haven't played yet. I did download Seth, the demo, which is a boomer shooter. I haven't played it yet. I may play it after we record. And then I also downloaded Underkeep, which reminds me of The Legend of Grim Rock, except more in the style of like a more traditional AD&D adventure game so you're like dungeon crawling, but there's like cartoony kind of characters that you're fighting in Underkeep. And then the last game that I downloaded and played, that is my recently played, was Thank You for Your Application. So the game doesn't have a release window yet, but it's being developed by Ice Lemon Tea and being published by No More Robots. It is a Papers, Please style game where you play as a junior interviewer, and you have to review candidates' resumes and determine if they are moved forward in the interview panel to get hired. And everybody has, their names are letters and numbers. Nobody has like a real name. They just have a social ranking name. So your name is like C84, and that's just your name. And you have various different rules when you're going into hiring people. So you get the resumes, and they'll be like, we are only hiring people from these particular colleges, and then eventually we'll go to like, we are only hiring people from universities. They eventually introduce like psych profiles, so like, because at one point in time somebody breaks down, so then everyone has to do a psych profile, and you have to make sure that your breakdown value is lower than 40%, and then they lower it to 35% because they're like, maybe we're rejecting too many people. And then you have to, if you figure out that they need to be rejected, you go and you kind of click to show the discrepancy, and then you issue them a thank you email, and then you reject them. So you give them a little tag on their resume, and then and there's a fun little chat that happens while they're in the window and they're talking to you. And so they'll be like, hey, I went to a really good school, and you're like, you have no job experience, thank you, goodbye. And then they're like, why did you send me a thank you? And then they leave. It's a lot of fun. If you like the Paper Please style games, definitely very reminiscent of that. I've played a number of the different type of Paper Please type of games because I like them, and I think that Thank You for Your Application is like right in that like sweet spot of being like complicated enough that it is interesting, and also like satirical enough that it's still funny.
Cool.
So yeah, I would recommend checking out the demo if it's still available. Thank You for Your Application.
Very cool. Well, getting into today's episode, I don't really know, besides the fact that I recently watched a movie regarding this, I don't really know what made me want to talk about Buck Rogers in particular, but that is our episode for today. We're going to talk about the classic hero, Buck Rogers, go through a bit of a history of Buck Rogers, and then talk about the video games that featured him, as we are a video game podcast, of course. But to be honest, the only reason I thought about talking about Buck Rogers is because I recently watched the 1979 theatrical film Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and that film is actually a pilot to a television series that would later air through the 70s. It's not a great movie, but it does have a really nice intro song, which I'll drop right here.
For 500 years, Buck Rogers drifted through a world in which reality and fantasy merged into a timeless dream.
Far beyond the world I've known, far beyond my time.
And after watching the movie, I got to thinking about Buck Rogers as a whole, how it helped inspire elements of future science fiction productions, and I was generally curious to see what video games were made based on it, and I found a few. And because it's our podcast and this is the way we do, we'll take up most of the time talking about Buck Rogers, probably his history, and then we'll take up the least amount of time talking about video games. But that's just how we do it on this show. To get into the history of Buck Rogers is a character with an incredibly deep, long history. In fact, in 2 years, the character will be 100 years old, since the first stories featuring him were published in 1928. The original story of Buck Rogers was told in the novella Armageddon 2419 AD by Philip Francis Nolan, published in August 1928 in the issue of Amazing Stories Pulp magazine. The following year, Buck Rogers was brought to life as a newspaper comic syndicated through the John F. Dial Company. The original comics were published under the name Buck Rogers 2429 and were written by Philip Nolan, and Richard Calkins would work on the illustrations. In his first appearance, Buck is a Great War veteran who gets a job surveying mines. One day, he's trapped in a mine that floods with gas. Instead of killing him, it locks him in suspended animation, and he awakens 500 years later in the year 2429, where he meets something that shocks him to his core, a woman soldier. The first comic is he wakes up in the future and he's like, they have women soldiers now. Specifically, he meets Wilma Deering, who would become a reoccurring character in the comics and later versions of the story of Buck Rogers. She kind of serves as a foil to the Buck Rogers character. The original novel for Armageddon 2419 has a similar story, but the difference is that Buck is actually named Anthony Rogers. He just goes by the nickname Buck. And also, the gas that preserves him is like special radioactive gas. And he was specifically tasked with investigating anomalies at the mine. So there's a little bit more of like people knew something weird was happening versus in the comic where he's just like, I'm going to a mine. There's gas in the mine. I'm waking up in the future now.
I mean, to be fair, for that era of comics, that's pretty much on point to all of the other comics that were written during that time.
Wasn't super deep. In any case, the story of Buck Rogers proved to be popular. People became more interested in space exploration as a whole, and Buck's adventures combined the mystery of outer space with familiar action elements found in much more grounded comics at the time, such as westerns or pirate newspaper comics. Buck is this kind of swashbuckling adventurer, and I think his character allows him to appeal to people who might have liked like a pirate newspaper comic, but now set in space.
Buck Rogers always reminds me of Corsair and the Starjammers.
Yes. Which I think there's a reason for that. I think Corsair is definitely inspired by Buck Rogers.
By Buck Rogers? Yeah, I can imagine. Buck Rogers inspired other copycats as well, beyond just Corsair, and it inspired them pretty quickly since it was proving to be successful. And one of the things that humans always like to do is whenever they see success, they like to copy it because they also like success. And King Features Syndicate ran Flash Gordon, Watkins Syndicate ran Don Dixon, Central Press Association had Brack Bradford, and a line of strips based on Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, John Carter of Mars, began to run from the United Feature Syndicate. In the 1930s, the Buck Rogers story moved away from the newspaper comics. The Famous Funnies and Vicks comic line of comic books from Eastern Color Printing frequently would include Buck Rogers stories. Kellogg Cereal also began producing booklets featuring news stories and art by Nolan and Calkins. Additionally, from 1933 to 1943, 12 Big Little books from Whitman were published featuring various Buck Rogers adventures. In 1930s, Buck made his first appearance on the radio with a program called
Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
The show was produced by Mutual Broadcasting System and syndicated by CBS, with each episode being around 15 minutes long. The cast include Adele Ronson as Wilma Deering and Edgar Sihel as Dr. Hewer. Buck, however, wouldn't be played by one person, and in fact was played by 4 different actors throughout the 860 episode run of the radio program from 1932 until 1947, which included Matt Crawley, Curtis Arnell, Carl Frank, and John Larkin, all lending their voices to the voice of Buck Rogers. Sound effects for the show were done by Ora Daigle-Nichols, the first woman to be the head of sound effects department, and the show was sponsored by Cocoa Malt, Cream of Wheat, and the Joe Lowe Company, which was the company that made popsicles, fudgicles, and creamsicles. And of course, it wouldn't be a Buck Rogers show if it wasn't sponsored by Kellogg's.
I listened to some of this radio program actually today. I found it was a collection of like 16 of the earlier episodes that were all part of one storyline. And each episode begins with your classic like Buck Rogers 25th century announcement, and then the radio announcer coming in doing the whole spiel about how like, hey kids, you're ready for another episode of Buck Rogers. But my favorite thing is these episodes in particular were all sponsored by the Jolo Company. Though they just said the company that created popsicle, fudgicles, and creamsicles. They never called it the Jolo Company. But they introduce a child spokesperson named Popsicle Pete.
This program is brought to you by the makers of Popsicle, Fudgicle, and Creamsicle, those delicious frozen confections on a stick. Now I have a swell surprise for you. The famous winner of the Typical American Boy contest has now become Popsicle Pete. And here's a message from him.
Hello, everybody. I sure am glad to meet you. And boy, am I glad I was picked to be the typical American boy. Because now I'm Popsicle Pete.
And they talk about how fudgesicles are nutritious for you, that they're made of all natural ingredients, such as milk.
Well, weren't they made with milk?
But I don't think fudgesicles are nutritious.
Do you want to know something fun about cereals?
What's that?
Did you know that, this is just on a side note, Kellogg's competition, General Mills, they were in the business of making submarines. And, in fact, the submarine that they designed was the same submarine that Bob Ballard used to find the Titanic. The Alvin was designed and built by General Mills. So, if it wasn't for cereal, we wouldn't have had the Titanic.
That would make Buck Rogers proud. Now, the character of Buck Rogers would be brought to screen for the first time in a 10-minute short film called Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, an Interplanetary Battle with the Tigermen of Mars. What a mouthful. This was aired at the 1933 World's Fair. This 10-minute short starred John DeLay Jr., who was in fact the son of John F. Dilley, as in the guy who ran the company that produced the original comic strip. So they needed an actor, and the guy who ran the comic strip said, "Have I got the actor for you?" And it was his son. The film was actually assumed to be lost until a 35mm print of it was discovered by the filmmaker's granddaughter and donated to the UCLA Film Archive. In 1939, Buck came back to the big screen in a serial produced by Universal Pictures Company. In this 12-part serial, he was played by Buster Crabbe, Wilma was played by Constance Moore, and Dr. Hewer by C. Montague Shaw. Between the 1950s and 1970s, the serial would be recut into 3 feature-length films. Buck would be, again, brought to live action to the small screen this time in 1950, with a TV production by ABC, airing from 1950 until 1951. Only 36 episodes were produced, and only 1 episode survives to this day. So this was not a show fondly remembered. The show actually largely suffered due to a small budget, and never quite became as popular as other shows that were popular at the time, such as Captain Video. In 1979, a feature film would be released. This is the feature film that I watched recently, directed by Daniel Haller, produced by Glenn Larson, as in the same Glenn Larson we talked about last week during our Battlestar Galactica episode. This 1979 film, as mentioned at the top of the show, was a theatrical pilot to a TV series that would air from September of 1979 until April 1981. The movie and show would star Gil Jarrett as Buck Rogers, who's given the full name of William Buck Rogers. Aaron Gray would play William Deering, Tim O'Connor as Elias Hewer, and there would be a new character introduced named Twicky, who was physically performed by Felix Silla and voiced by Mel Blanc. Twicky is a robot who kind of looks like a smaller version of C-3PO, but silver. Twicky usually says the words bitty 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 and then some type of punchline that is relevant to whatever is happening at the moment.
I know it's chilly, but we've got no choice. Our orders are to stick close to Buck, and he may need us. So back in the cooler. Tweaky, I'm speaking to you.
Oh, freezing my ball bearings off.
Carried around Twicky's neck is another character who is actually a computer named Dr. Theopolis, an AI member of the Earth Council, who is voiced by Howard Flynn in the pilot and Eric Server in the rest of the show. Throughout the movie, Theopolis tries to defend Buck as Buck gets accused of being a spy masquerading as someone from the past. As when Buck shows up, he just kind of shows up randomly to Earth in this spaceship, and people are like, "We don't trust you," and he's like, "I'm from the 80s." And that's just kind of how the movie goes. Yeah, so I watched the movie recently. recently, I felt it was okay. I didn't think it was amazing. I thought the special effects were kind of fun, but overall, I thought it was kind of bland. I feel like Buck as a character, specifically in this movie, was just incredibly unlikable. I assume this was the intention. It was like if Han Solo had the personality of Sean Connery James Bond. Like Han Solo in all his like cool attitude, just being absolutely miserable to women. Needless to say, Buck Rogers as a whole inspired a lot of things. I mean, it would be one of the inspirations behind Star Wars. Star Wars' kind of serialized element to it was pulled from things like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Buck Rogers also inspired comic books, tons of toys, movies, TV shows, radio programs, and of course, games.
I love when this podcast talks about video games. The first video game based on Buck Rogers was actually a game that doesn't really feature him. Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom, developed by Sega for the arcade, Atari 2600, 5200, and various home computers at the time, is a rail shooter where you pilot a spaceship in a third-person perspective and you shoot at various enemies that appear in front of you. You fly through an almost Death Star-style trench run in a funky-looking spaceship, blasting at various things that fly at you. After the trench run, you are in deep space and get surrounded by stereotypical UFOs. Then you're on a planet with different obstacles. Then a weird area where there is a ceiling and a floor. Then it repeats. The arcade game is a high-speed shooter with very fun 1980s graphics. The Atari version is much like most Atari versions, a simpler style game, but it still maintains the pseudo 3D perspective. The game would go on to influence Sega's own Space Harrier, which is a very good game, which in turn would inspire Star Fox, which is also a very good game. So it did leave a fairly deep legacy in terms of gaming history. It also did decently on release, being among the top 13 highest grossing arcade units in 1983 in the United States and the 13th most successful in Japan in 1985. Magazines were positive about it, such as French's Tilt magazine, which gave it a 6 out of 6 stars because they're French, and Britain's Computer and Video Game praising the game, saying that if people like the TV show, they would like the game. But who also gives 6 stars out of 6? Why is there 6 stars? There should only be 5 or 10. This game does sound like they were trying to cash in on some Star Wars.
Literally is a Death Star trench run at the beginning of the game, and then you're in deep space, which is exactly like how it is in the Star Wars arcade game. You start in deep space, and then you go to the Death Star trench run. While not a video game, a game setting would be developed in the 1980s by TSR called Buck Rogers 25th Century, stylized as XXV lower C. This setting is set following a period of war that occurred in 1999 between the USSR and the United States, serving as the first nuclear war. The Earth would be split into 3 alliances: the Russo-American Mercantile, the Indo-Asian Consortium, and the Euro-Bloc faction. Over the years, the 3 factions would then begin to colonize space and terraform different planets, and the Russo-American Mercantile became one of the more domineering of these groups. In fact, I think it controls all of Earth in this storyline. In this universe, in 1999, Anthony Buck Rogers would be launched into space to destroy a satellite controlled by the Soviets, but his ship would be badly damaged. Because he could not re-enter Earth's atmosphere or risk destroying the ship and killing himself, he activated cryogenic sleep and did so to await rescue, and he waited 500 years. Because no one came to rescue him. Upon his awakening, he joins a resistance movement called NEO to liberate Earth from the Russo-American Mercantile. The board game, which utilizes this world, would be called Buck Rogers Battle for the 25th Century. It's actually played very similar to Risk in that you have these different ships and soldiers that you move across a board. The board represents the solar system. Unlike in Risk, though, where you have continents that stay still, the planets move because planets move when they're orbiting. So this kind of changes the relative distance between planets and allows you to maybe station some troops on a planet before it gets close to another planet so that you can invade that planet. A little bit of thinking there with the space as opposed to just dealing with static continents. Oh, not that continents don't move, they do, but plate tectonics aren't enough to formalize like an army by the move of the plates. TSR would also create a tabletop RPG based on the game setting using a modified Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rule set.
This was during the time when TSR did a number of collaborations with a number of licensors because they could.
That's true.
They had a series of Marvel games as well. 2 video games would be developed that were set in the VC continuity, which is the 25th century continuity. The first would be the 1990 video game Buck Rogers Countdown to Doomsday for MS-DOS, Commodore 64, the Amiga, and Sega Genesis. You create a party of 6 characters from a choice of 5 different classes: warrior, rogue, medic, engineer, or rocket jock, which should just make 6 rocket jocks. There are choices of 6 races: human, desert runner, Venetian, Martian, Mercurian, someone from Mercury, or Tinker, someone who's a tinker? I don't know, from the planet of Tink. Desert runners are those people just hang out in the desert. And why are there not, is he a mouse? The Rocket Knight?
Yeah.
A possum.
Yeah,
should be a possum. Anyway, from there you have 5 different game views: a solar system view, which shows you the different planets and asteroids; an overworld view that shows up when you land on the surface of a planet; an adventuring view, which is a 3D perspective; a land combat view, which is isometric; and a ship-to-ship combat view when you confront an enemy ship. So a lot of different views.
Classic role-playing game from SSI.
Which makes sense, because they were in bed with TSR. The Sega version had some changes, such as making only human, desert runner, and tinker as playable races. Take out the cool aliens.
Venusians, Martians,
and only rocket jack, medic, and rogue, and warrior as playable classes. Which, as long as rocket jock's in there, that's all that matters. The skill set between different classes and equipment is also more limited, and there are a lot less weapons. And instead of first-person view in adventuring mode, it is changed to isometric view. The game overall did well, with Computer Gaming World calling it a very satisfying, the Dragon magazine giving it 4 out of 5 stars, the White Wolf magazine rating it a 5 out of 5 stars, Megatech would rate the Genesis game at 91%, and Mega placed it on 39 of their top Mega Drive games of all times, which is, I would say, how out of 39 out of what? 50? 100? 200?
I don't know how many it was out of, but there were more than 39 of them released at the time. So
all right, well, great. So at least it placed higher than that. It was hopefully middle of the pack. There was a sequel, Matrix Cubed, which would go on to be released in 1992 in the Gold Box engine, because this really feels like a Gold Box type of game situation, though it was largely criticized on release as it was called anticlimactic and a disappointment in a review from Computer Gaming World, and in 1993 would re-review the game and advise people who were not real hardcore Roger fans to avoid it. So they looked at it and then re-looked at it, and both times said, don't play this game. Dragon magazine, however, was more positive, giving the game 4 out of 5 stars. Also, decidedly, their video game segment was a very small portion of their magazine.
Yeah, I think they were just happy it was a role-playing game. They were like, hell yeah, we love the Gold Box engine. We don't care.
Yeah, and the Dragon magazine, I believe they were not necessarily unbiased towards TSR. In 1993, TSR would drop the world they created with the 25th Century and would release High Adventure Cliffhanger's Buck Rogers Adventure Game, a tabletop RPG that was based on more of the original 1928 novel Armageddon, 2419 AD, and the 1929 comics. White Wolf magazine would positively review this new RPG, with issue 40 featuring a review from Ken Cliff, who gave it a 4 out of 5, but said to use whether or not you liked pulp sci-fi as a measuring stick.
And that would actually basically be it for Buck Rogers video games and such. But we're not quite done yet, because we can't talk about Buck Rogers without talking about one of his best known parodies.
Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century.
The original Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century would be part of the 1953 Merry Melodies cartoon from Warner Brothers. Directed by Chuck Jones, the cartoon features Daffy Duck as the titular Duck Rogers, Porky Pig as his eager young space cadet, and Marvin the Martian as the enemy that he deals with. The original cartoon is set in the year 2350. Duck Dodgers is on a mission to find the source of the element polonium phosphex, which is also known as the shaving cream atom. He does so by traveling to the uncharted planet X. Upon arrival, Marvin the Martian is there to claim the planet in the name of Mars, resulting in a battle between the two. The whole short, which is only about 7 or 8 minutes, ends with the planet being mostly destroyed down to a very thin sliver of land, with Dodgers finally able to claim the small chunk in the name of Earth. The cartoon is widely considered probably one of the best of the Merry Melody shorts from Jones, inspiring a sequel in 1980 called Duck Dodgers and the Return of the 24th and a Half Century, and a TV series just called Duck Dodgers that aired from 2003 until 2005. I remember the show. I remember it being kind of weird, especially because there is an episode where Duck Dodgers gets his dry cleaning mixed up with Hal Jordan, aka the Green Lantern, and Duck Dodgers becomes the Green Lantern and has to fight Sinestro. And there's a scene where all the Green Lanterns, including Guy Gardner and Jon Stewart, like team up with Duck Dodgers to fight Sinestro. Though it does have one of my favorite lines where Duck Dodgers confronting Sinestro and he goes, "Wow, you really do look like the devil."
That's funny.
That won't be necessary.
Hey, in person you really do look like the devil.
I know. I get that a lot.
Well, I don't believe in judging people by their outward appearance.
Neither do I.
There would be 2 video games based on the character of Duck Dodgers. The first being Daffy Duck The Martian Missions for Super Nintendo by ICOM Simulations and for the Game Boy by Sunsoft, released in 1993. It's a platform game where you go to a Martian resort and you kill a bunch of Martians because Duck Dodgers is brutal. He goes to a Martian resort, just instantly starts fighting Martians. The final boss in the game is, of course, Marvin the Martian. You're given a starting gun with unlimited ammo at the beginning of the game, though various other weapons can be found that have finite ammo. And there's also a jetpack, a shield, and a special attack you can perform.
The SNES version of Daffy Duck The Marvin Missions received a 7 out of 10 from EGM, with the review praising the animation and voice lines in the game. I believe it's also the highest rated game out of Buck and Duck.
I think it is the highest rated game.
The Game Boy version, however, would not be the highest rated game. They would go on to get a 4.75 out of 10 from EGM, which called the Game Boy version repetitive with some difficult platforming segments. Another game, Duck Dodgers starring Daffy Duck, was released in 2000 for the N64 by Paradigm Entertainment, and this would be a 3D platformer where you would play as Duck Dodgers as you travel around various planets to collect energy atoms and defeat Marvin's various cronies. There are different mini-games in the game, such as the version of Pong with Daffy's head. The gameplay also features some first-person segments, though most of the game is a third-person platformer. This game did all right in terms of its review, with EGM giving it the lowest score at 4 out of 10. However, because it did all right, GameFan gave it a 77%, and IGN gave it a 7.6 out of 10, which if you aggregate that together, that's like a C. And that will do it for both Buck Rogers and Duck Dodgers, respectively.
That's right. I think that's just a good way to summarize it, right? Is they were in a handful of games, and the one with the ducks were better.
One of the games with the ducks was better.
That's true. I just find it interesting that, like, you do have Buck Rogers video games, but the 2 of the ones, which were the ones by SSI, are barely Buck Rogers games. They're just set in a world around Buck Rogers, but you don't have to play as Buck Rogers. They're RPG games, so you just play as characters in this world. I don't know. I think that's interesting, but in any case, who knows? Maybe someday we'll talk about, I don't know, Flash Gordon. To get into our retro rewind, though, Seth, I have a question for you before we get into this retro rewind. Have you ever looked at the Bible and said, gosh darn, I sure would love to read this on a monochromatic green screen that notoriously has bad ghosting and poor lighting?
I did. Yes, I did.
You did? You did?
And I believe also somebody else did, and that was producer Doug.
Yes. Yeah, good news for you and producer Doug. Wisdom Tree has you covered. The NIV Bible in the 20 Lost Levels of Joshua is in fact the entirety of the New International Version of the Holy Bible on your Game Boy. And what's fun is it's not the only one. Wisdom Tree in fact released the King James Bible also for the Game Boy. So if you truly wanted to, you could buy a Game Boy in the 1990s and a copy of NIV Bible in the 20 Lost Levels of Joshua, and you could buy a second Game Boy in the 90s and get a copy of King James Bible for the Game Boy, also by Wisdom Tree, and you could have them next to each other, and you could in fact compare the New International Version with the King James Version and see the differences. Look at that.
Do you know what the difference is? One of them has 20 Lost Levels of Joshua.
One of them doesn't. Yeah, the New International Version of the Bible did in fact include 20 Lost Levels of Joshua. Not just the game, the actual book. No, that is the game part of the game that I played, as the rest of it is a book. But I did play through parts of the 20 Lost Levels of Joshua. The 20 Lost Levels of Joshua is in fact an additional 20 levels to the game Joshua, which was released separately by Wisdom Tree on both the Game Boy, Sega Genesis, and NES. And this, Joshua, is a puzzle game that was a sequel to another Wisdom Tree game called Exodus, which is a reskin of a Color Dreams game. Might I remind mind you, Color Dreams and Wisdom Tree are in fact the same company. And this Color Dreams game was called Crystal Mines. Joshua / Exodus / Crystal Mines are all the same game. They're basically simple. You play as, in this one, Joshua, and you walk around a maze, and you have to clear out rocks, and you collect pots of what I assume are oil or something, and dudes try to kill you because they don't like you. It's harmless fun with a biblical twist. Does it hold up? I feel like I might in fact be smited by the Almighty if I say that the Bible does not hold up. But also, arguably, yes, reading a book on a Game Boy is kind of awful, and I don't recommend it, so that part does not hold up. Joshua, however, it's a decent puzzle game, right? Like Crystal Mines, the original one from Color Dreams, not a bad game. Exodus, not a bad game. It's the same game, just with Moses, and Joshua is basically Exodus with Joshua. So it's a decent puzzle game. It kind of reminds me of like a slightly different version of Bomberman, where you don't have like the bombs you set, and you instead are like shooting projectiles instead of bombs. But in any case, yeah, that's NIV Bible and the 20 Lost Levels Joshua for the Game Boy, and it was all right. Next week, Seth, you can play King of Kings: The Early Years for the NES.
Well, thank you. I'm excited about playing this game. Zach had me play Ambush at Soranor for MS-DOS, which was developed and published by Minecraft, and it was released in 1993 and was the sequel to the game.
Minecraft. I thought it was published by Minecraft. I was like...
Minecraft.
Yes.
Not Minecraft. Minecraft. They sound similar, but they're not. One has a mine, one has a mind, so it's either your brain or a dark tunnel and I'll tell you who makes better games. Probably Mojang. But anyway, Ambush at Soranor was released in 1993, and it was the sequel to the game Siege from 1992, which was also developed by Minecraft. You play as a mercenary company and sign up to work for one of the 6 rival clans that control a region. And I'm going to be blunt and say each one of these guys is ugly. They are all 6 of the ugliest dudes. Like, if these are the rulers of this world and these are them, I'm sorry, but they are just all ugly. Not a single good-looking dude in the entire realm. There are 2 human-looking guys, a dwarf-looking guy, an elf-looking guy, an orc-looking guy, and a creepy dude in a robe. And they all are butt ugly. I picked the dwarf-looking guy and then immediately spent all my money on just recruiting veterans, which was the cheapest unit. And then I had no money and 75 veterans. And that's when the game decided that everything needed to be really slow. And maybe it was because I bought too many units. But I had no money, possibly negative money. And then I started playing, and the game chugged. It was so slow. And all it was showing me was a map with yellow dots on it, and they represented my troops. And then when I moved them, it would just be a wave of yellow dots. But the game moved so slowly, not because of the gameplay, but because of, I don't know if it was the emulation or something was going on, but it was like jumpy, which maybe I had too many troops. But essentially, I moved my yellow blobs into the red blobs, and then it started making screaming noises, and I was like, I have 75 of these troops, and I'm going against 4. Anyway, it does not hold up, unless you figure out how to emulate it correctly. I don't think it holds up. I think there are better games that get the same point across out there. Sorry if you like Ambush at Soranor. Anyway, next week, Zach, you can play Magic Carpet 2, The Netherworlds.
Great, I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you have any thoughts on Buck Rogers in the 25th century or Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, let us know. You can do so by emailing us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on Patreon. Check us out. We're available on Twitch. Check us out. We're available on social media, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're also available on YouTube. Like and subscribe. And that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.
right.